Friday, and certainly good afternoon, good morning for those of you domestically. We have a few folks from Europe as well. And so, yeah, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, I'll make this very engaging, very sort of interacting. If you have any questions, click on that Q&A button. I've seen Paul Stevens do that as well. Thank you, Paul. But click there and ask me any questions. Just type up any sort of questions or commentary, and I'll address it during the call. But I'll jump right in. My name is Armin Kokosh. I'm a founder of Virology Analytics. I'll share a little bit more about my background, but we'll spend probably the next 45 or 50 minutes or so talking about how to actually build a B2B margin analytics and optimization platform, and how to do that in under 90 days. And really, the impetus behind me scheduling this webinar was several things, but one story I vividly remember about 9 or 10 months ago when I started out with Virology. I was talking to potential clients, CFO of a CPG, grew very fast, double-digit CAGR for several years. And so we were talking about sort of some of the difficulties that they went through, little pricing control, very little margin control, insights were sort of not at their fingertips, analysis, and things like that related to pricing and discounting and kind of mix management. It was very manual, and it took days and weeks, and everything had to be recreated all at once. And so, my commentary to the CFO was, well, you guys need a sort of a very foundational margin analytics, pricing analytics solution for your company, and it's fairly simple to build nowadays. And so, the pushback was, well, we don't have a year, we don't have $1 million, anyways. We're growing at a double-digit sort of CAGR, and so we don't need that. I had plenty of things on my plate, so I didn't push back. But it kind of made me realize that we live in a different world now, right? And there's a lot of disruption in the world today. There's inflation. There's different expectations that I'll talk about that a little bit. And by the way, there's some of the tools and some of the technologies that, by the way, all of your companies have today nowadays have evolved tremendously over the last decade, right? And so a lot of the things that sort of turnkey providers have developed, you can actually do that easily yourself. So I'll show you how. I'm using Miro. Hopefully you guys can see my screen okay. Again, we'll make this interactive and ask any questions. But as you kind of see the screen, I try to organize this in a way. By the way, you'll have access to this board and the content right after this meeting, and then I'll actually give you a production version margin analytics dashboard about a week from now. But the way it's organized is sort of along the timeline. So you'll see that as we're kind of building the solution, we'll talk about the steps. It leads up to that kind of a 12-week or 90-day time frame, right? Starting from sort of understanding what we're trying to build, going into sort of the research phase, building a concept, designing it, building a minimum viable solution, then launching and training. And then I'll spend a little bit of time around sort of this change management piece, right? Which is anyways the most sort of difficult and important aspect anytime you're building a analytics capability. But let's jump right in. Let's see if I can present this, and we'll start right at the beginning. I'll share maybe a little bit of information about myself as well. If you have trouble seeing the screen, just let me know. So a bit about my background. I'm not going to belabor. If you can probably look at LinkedIn, but I've spent probably a good 12 to 15 years sort of in this combination of revenue management and advanced analytics and data science. Last 3 years, I co-founded a corporate analytics startup. It was a sort of a data science startup for a large $5 billion corporation. But most of my experience has been sort of pricing and what I call sales analytics and sales optimization. And so, one of the things that I've sort of noticed in my career is the things that I've really enjoyed is creating capabilities, building solutions, and then working with those user groups, especially commercial organizations, on how to capitalize on them, how to take advantage of them, how to drive different pricing or sales strategies in their organizations. And that's really what I've enjoyed the most. It was less about kind of the organizational communication pieces that are needed, right, at sort of at the executive level. And so very early on this year, I founded a Virology Analytics, which is a very specialized consultancy, really kind of built around the 2-3 very niche things that I'm good at and that I really enjoy, and that's really kind of around margin optimization, promotion effectiveness, and sales growth analytics. And one of the reasons I built it is you'll see. So I'm not going to belabor most of these points, but you guys all know what some of the challenges are, particularly in B2B environments, especially with manufacturers, a lot of distribution and sort of retail industries. Long cycle analytics, so things take a long time. You often don't have domain expertise, particularly when it comes to sort of revenue management and pricing strategy, and therefore things are not as effective when they get developed and nobody is sort of using that. Price setting is highly suboptimal. Why? Because most companies actually don't have some of these solutions that we're actually going to build together over the next 50 minutes or so. Many companies, they do discounts, they do promotions. Most of those are negative ROI, and most companies actually don't have a good idea of what the return on investment is, right? And that's a big problem in many, many industries. And there's simple solutions on how to actually fix it. Pricing processes are often very manual. So you have small armies of people doing pricing manually, right? And it's just sort of a very clunky Frankenstein process that can be easily automated and made dynamic. And key decision makers often like sort of insights, right? I mean, a lot of the insights that are needed to make the right decision and the right surgical decision, it's not at their fingertips. It's again, it takes a lot of sort of manual rote work to kind of recreate it. And so, the thing that I realized is, two things. One, there's a tremendous upside for companies that go from this kind of low maturity stage of the revenue analytics journey to doing even simple things like a margin analytics platform or a sales analytics platform or building some sort of customer facing embedded analytics. And their relative performance is quite drastic against a peer group that doesn't have these, right? So you see it on the screen. And then number two, I sort of recognize this notion that even though I'm a data science practitioner and a machine learning aficionado, and I've kind of built deep learning models and whatnot, and I'm reading a ton of books on that. I fully realized, kind of early on in my career, that technological sophistication and complexity doesn't matter. Your internal customers don't care about it. Your external customers especially don't care about it. So you may as well focus on things that drive tangible business and customer outcomes, right? In the simplest manner possible, right? And that's really kind of the philosophy around which I built a company. Here's my beautiful family. I'm clearly the outlier in terms of looks. My wife Ashley, my two kids, 6 and 3. They keep me busy, and so when I'm not working, I'm not spending time with them. I'm reading books. That's kind of a collection of some of the literature that I read, and so I purposely kind of included this in this Miro board because once you have access to it, you can actually zoom in on these things and like read some of the titles around what I'm reading and how I've sort of hone my expertise in revenue analytics. And so if you have any ideas, you're more than welcome to purchase them. But there's some excellent books. So let's get started real quick. So why are we here? Right, we kind of told you about the story that was the impetus behind this webinar. But really, if you look back historically, for most mid-market firms, and I'm talking about sort of 10 million or so to all the way to about $1 billion. You're building actual revenue growth platforms, revenue analytics platforms, price optimization platforms required huge investment, right? Long cycle times, and certainly this big anxiety gap. And by the way, it failed most of the time. And so that's kind of a fundamental issue that I've seen with companies, both companies that I worked for and companies that I've consulted with. I believe, as much as I think turnkey software is good, and there's some good pieces of software out there, I think the approach is actually broken for kind of most companies which form this middle market. One of the reasons we actually can't wait 12 to 18 months to build these capabilities with a sort of a high failure rate at the end, right? Especially in an environment where there's inflation and there's changing expectations, right? At the same time, we live in this, sort of environment where there's democratized analytics, right? We have more and more data. We also have a younger workforce that's very sort of data and tech savvy, and they're very intellectually curious. And I think we can find most of those people in companies. And then we have open source software, right? That's getting better every year. We have self-serve BI tools that are getting better and better every year. For example, Tableau of today or Power BI of today is very different than what it was 10 years ago, right? In fact, Power BI wasn't even mature 10 years ago. And so most companies have this crazy amount of transactional data that is just yearning to be mined, right? And created some structure and some framework around building these insights and handing it over to folks in revenue management, finance, and sales, and so forth. And so building these capabilities is actually quite easy nowadays, and it's become very, very easy. But I think most companies don't quite realize just how easy it is from a technical and analytical standpoint. And so I talked about this a little bit, but I think this is an important point. I think we do live in a different world, right? There's inflation, there's hyper competition, there's certainly growing customer choice, and so you have this dichotomy around needing to raise prices. You have the prisoner's dilemma of some companies not raising prices, right? And so now you have sort of increased competition for products and margin erosion, right? And so there's this need to actually build some capabilities around measuring your price realization, measuring your discounting activity relative to guardrails, measuring your margin performance, understanding how product and customer mix is influencing your profit and net sales performance. Why? Because you do need to raise prices, and you need to be surgical about it, because of this instance of sort of other companies may not act rationally. And so I think not having these capabilities, right, lack of insights actually creates a ton of sort of missed sales and profit opportunities. And for some companies that are asset heavy, it could actually result in liquidity problems. We talked about turnkey software, and again, this is not to downplay the importance of it, but the reality is for most companies, it's expensive, takes too long to stand up, somewhat of a black box. Most often it doesn't have the flexibility to actually address some of the domain or the company nuances. Really hard to maintain. Most companies don't have the expert workforce to actually maintain or create updates and things like that. And by the way, most of the time it fails to generate positive ROI, right? So regardless of the volume of RFPs that are out there and the success of a lot of the firms that are excellent firms, it actually fails most of the time, and it doesn't quite add value to companies. Most of you on this call work for organizations where you already have some of these tools in your arsenal, right? You see some of the examples out there for open source or Python. You have some, hopefully, some of your data is in a cloud environment, right? Especially transactional and sort of inventory data and things like that. And then hopefully you have some tools, right, that you can actually build these capabilities. Power BI and Tableau are two most popular ones. I included Excel, right? If you're a mid-market company, less than $50 million with maybe less than 50 or so SKUs, Excel is actually a perfectly fine tool to build a sustainable, scalable platform, right? Most people don't realize it, but I think it's actually fairly powerful. Okay, so what we'll show you is stuff that we've done with about half a dozen companies across manufacturing, distribution, and then CPG, which is part of manufacturing, right? And so we've kind of built these margin analytics and optimization platforms. I'll show you the steps and the best practices that we've done. Also, kind of talk about some of the pitfalls. And the emphasis here, right? This whole idea of driving towards outcomes is building a good enough solution. Building a good enough solution or a strong enough solution in 3 months, it actually delivers 80-90% of the total value realization, and then just really kind of facilitating that with the organization and achieving results. That's sort of the idea that I'm certainly trying to facilitate with my network, but that's really the idea that I built Revology around. What you'll see kind of follows this outcome-based analytics engagement process. So here's the steps, right? Most of these are sort of common sense. You guys are all aware this term outcome-based analytics engagement may be kind of a unique nomenclature, but the idea is really sort of this overarching theme of, one, really understand the problem you're trying to solve, be able to kind of decompose that problem into smaller components that you can attack, as opposed to building some crazy esoteric North Star vision, right? So decompose it into smaller, manageable chunks that are pragmatic and easily implementable and drive value. Third piece is really important, is essentially bringing your key stakeholders, your power users, bringing them along the development journey, right? So build the concept with them, build the design with them, pilot the minimum viable solution, and really sort of leverage these folks as you're building these solutions and capabilities to drive action, measure the results, et cetera. I think that whole concept is really important around iterative alignment and roadshows. Minimum viable solution, right? And then launching the product and then assessing how it works, and then sort of having this continuous improvement to make sure that it's sustainable in the organization, right? So that's really the concept. Again, it follows kind of a familiar pattern for those of you that have done sort of analytic capability building for companies. We'll talk about just sort of the stages here, right? So step one, we'll understand the problem. So imagine yourselves, you're in your company, you've been tasked with building a kind of a B2B margin optimization platform. So first you're going to do is you're going to meet with your key stakeholders, right? So you need to understand who are your key users. In our case, is going to be sales reps, their sales readers, and it's going to be the functional folks in pricing, sales ops, finance. Maybe you can add merchandising to that mix as well. But in this phase of sort of doing the understanding piece and doing some exploration, there's really two things that you want to do. One, you want to understand the top 3 or 5 questions that these folks have around sort of pricing or margin performance. And number 2, you want to understand what are the outcomes that you need to drive towards with each of these constituents, right? And so the first one is really comes from the users themselves, or the second one is sort of a combination of sort of user wants and also needs, right? Is sort of determined by you as the pricing or the margin expert, as well as senior leadership. But some of the examples, right? And again, you'll have this content, so you can kind of read through the details. But some of the examples, maybe sales reps would want to know which customers are driving their net sales and margin performance erosion, right? And what's causing it within 1, 2, 3 clicks. They want to be able to know that. And what are the outcomes that they're going to drive towards? Is they're going to stop the habit of always kind of going towards the maximum discount or the maximum guidelines for customers, and actually pay attention to maybe total annual volume, or pay attention to customer lifetime value, or maybe RFM scores if you have it, and so forth. Similar concept with sales leaders. They may want to know who are my best of the best, right? The Bob and the wow concept that most companies use. Who are those reps that are doing well in terms of margin realization? Who are the ones that are not doing so well? Who are the ones that are giving excessive discounts? And what it does, right? The outcomes we're trying to drive towards is enable them to have better, more empirical conversations with the sales team. Also have sort of better data-informed conversations with senior executives on like what's happening with their business. Why is net sales up or down? Why is profit up or down, right? And so similar thing with the functional folks. The only kind of call out that I'll say here is, as you're building these solutions, as we're developing this margin analytics platform, right? These folks on the right, who are the functional experts, the pricing analysts, sales ops analysts, managers, it's okay to build a bit more complexity for them, right? The idea is to actually upskill the pricing and the margin analytics team, or our trade team, or our finance team, right? The idea is to actually upskill them and get them used to some more sort of sophisticated pricing and margin analytics. For sales folks, you really want to keep it simple. You really want to stick to the 2 or 3 things that really matter for them, and that's typically going to be why am I winning or losing in terms of sales, and where do I have discounting opportunities, right? That's typically kind of the bread and butter of what matters for sales folks. Okay, so we've done the understanding phase. We'll move on to the second phase that you see here, right? It's the research. Is the research phase. So I'll kind of describe what this phase does, right? And by the way, the first one, it takes about a week, right, to really sort of understand what you're trying to build. This second phase, again, it takes about 1 or 2 weeks. I mean, ideally, you really want to spend a couple of weeks of really intensive sessions with key stakeholders. And what you're doing here is very straightforward. You're essentially building this platform. You're building it in words, right, based on the conversations that you're having with each of the individual constituents. And so very pragmatically, what that may look like is, imagine this sheet of words that you see on the screen. This is the actual platform that we're building, and we're describing in words what the components of the platform will be. And so each of these boxes, you see these 4 boxes here, they're in individual analytical areas that we're going to build. They're each going to solve one sort of key sort of analytical problem that a company has around pricing and margin performance. Each of these numbered areas are the actual modules, or think of the modules as the literal dashboard, or the screen that you see, right? And that's how we're thinking about sort of building this concept phase. And so again, to make it very pragmatic, right? When we're building things for the executive audiences, we want to have some synthesized version, right? Within seconds, we want the executives to understand where are we winning or losing in terms of gross profit or net price realization. and enable them to hold their teams accountable, right? It needs to be fairly easy to understand, quick, and straight to the point. On the right side, you'll see a deep dive revenue and profit growth. Some companies call it revenue and gross profit decomposition. Others call it revenue and gross profit drivers. But you'll see the individual modules that make up for that, right? And so again, each of these modules will be a dashboard in the platform that we're building. What are the outcomes that we're trying to drive towards? Most pragmatically, we want to be able to call out some quick wins. What are the top 10 or top 20 things that I, as a salesperson or a sales manager or sales leader, need to pay attention to, either in terms of discounting performance, or too many free product giveaways, or just maybe some super low customer margin for some odd reason, right? But it's all about driving quick wins in the fastest, most efficient way possible. Discounting behaviors, it's another popular thing. You'll see some of the individual modules underneath them, right? So there's the overarching analysis around sort of customer discount analysis. How are customers squaring up in terms of their sales performance and their discounting performance, and where are the outliers? And then sales team stack ranking. That's a really popular thing for sales teams to actually develop, and that's sort of this gamification around pricing performance and pricing behavior. I think it's a really key one. And the discount curve analysis. And lastly, pricing and margin performance. So again, think of this as a concept stage, overarchingly with the platform that you're building. Two key important things. One is you need to have some sort of iterative sequential insights, right? You want the modules, or you want each of these modules to be descriptive. You want it to be diagnostic. And again, within 2 or 3 clicks, no more than that. You want it to be predictive. And when I say predictive, you want to be able to understand what happens if you close the gap on your discounting outliers. What happens to the business if you close the gap on your margin outliers? What happens if you increase price by X%? What is the impact to your business in net sales and gross profit, right? So these are the 3 key things that should govern each of the dashboards and each of the components as you're sort of building it, right? And of course, you have to have some dynamic components to be able to drill up and drill down. I'll show you an example maybe around sort of how concept development happens for each of these modules. So you saw the numbers in each of those analytical boxes. Each of those numbers are a dashboard. For each dashboard, we're actually going to build a concept. And we do this with the stakeholders. We sit down with the sales team, sit down with the finance team, sit down with the pricing team. Sometimes we sit down with the merchandising team. And we actually build this together. And again, in words, we're kind of building one individual module. And the sort of fundamental concept that governs this is, one, we need to understand what are the top 3 KPIs that each dashboard will add. Again, this could be 3 or 4, but I like to use the top 3. And then for each of the user groups, what are the top 3 questions that they have, right? In the initial research phase or the understanding phase, we had a host of questions that we discussed with them. You saw that on the summary page. Here, we're really trying to nail down what are the 3 most important things that sales reps have, that sales managers have, and then the executives have, right? And so we do this for each and every dashboard, right? So each and every module in the section. This is an example for the gross, for the discounts versus net sales, right? And you'll see an example of what we do with the actual design. I think Kumar, thanks for your question. Kumar was asking, do you see prescriptive analytics suggesting what to do as part of the solution? Yeah, Kumar, 100%, right? So I think prescriptive analytics is sort of that nirvana stage that you need to build in with these solutions. What I like to focus on, mostly for companies that are at the really kind of low stage of their pricing and margin analytics maturity, is really just kind of focus on this descriptive, diagnostic, and predictive. Once they have that down, then we can move into the prescriptive stage as well, right? It's a bit harder to sort of build in. I mean, right? If you want to sort of go into a fully sort of sophisticated optimization-based mixed integer optimization or something similar, right? You can build that. It's going to be more complex and it's going to be more time, and you can't do that in 90 days, right? So I would say, very good point. Yes, you need to build that because you have the data, and I think it's the right thing to do for organizations, and it makes the job of the sales reps easier. But it's just going to be taking a longer time to actually develop and build. Thanks for your question, Kumar. Okay, so we build the concept, right? We understand what the users want. We understand what the users need. We build the actual dashboard in words. Next step is to actually design it, right? So that's the design phase. And we do this again together with the commercial team. We do this together with the pricing and the finance users, right? And we do this in iterative steps. As you think about the timeline, concept is about a couple of weeks. Design is also in a couple of weeks, right? And so you painstakingly have to do this for each and every dashboard component, essentially. This is an example for the gross margin net sales customer matrix, right? It's a very rough outline. Again, the actual dashboard will look much better. But as you think about the kind of the fundamentals behind it, what are we trying to understand? On the left side, we have this customer scatter plot, right? So we're trying to understand how are customers performing in terms of gross margin performance, perhaps year to date or trailing 12 months. And where are they on the scale of cumulative percent of net sales, running total percent of net sales, right? So the customers that are right at this line are 80% of the sales. The customer, the left of this line is roughly 20% of the sales. And that's a typical phenomenon for most sort of B2B industries. About anywhere between 3 to 10% of the customers make up 80, 90% of your volume, right? It's a fairly typical setup. But notice, what we want to build is exactly this sort of customer landscape with the ability to filter in anything that we want, right? Particularly kind of regions and sales managers and brands and product segments, with the ability to hover over and view information about that customer, both sort of descriptive, psychographic, demographic information if it's available from your CRM, as well as actual sales and margin performance, year-over-year trends, and things like that. So view relevant information when you hover over, and you really want to visualize how they're performing relative to maybe the minimum threshold that you established for gross margin, how they're performing relative to the average gross margin. And again, building this initial sort of view on the left side is critical because it really allows your sales leaders and allows especially your finance and pricing personnel to understand if we have a margin go get, where do we need to go? And guess what? We need to go look at segment 6. Really small customers, really crappy margins. How do we actually rationalize that, right? And then move on to sort of maybe segment 5, the larger customers, really kind of low margins. But that's step number 1, right? Building this sort of descriptive, very visual scatter plot that actually calls out outliers with color codes. Step 2, run some scenario analysis, right? So the questions you're trying to answer here is, what happens if I raise the performance of these kind of low margin group segment 5 and 6? What happens if we raise their performance to the minimum threshold that we establish? And this could be a manual threshold that we set, or could be some statistical threshold, right? 25th percentile or so forth, right? Although percentiles it's a harder concept to understand for most companies, particularly for commercial teams. But what happens to my net sales? What happens to my gross profit? What is incremental gross profit by sort of closing that gap? What happens if I close the gap 25% of the way, 50% of the way, and so forth, right? So the ability to provide a scenario analysis for whatever customer group that you select on the screen is really important, right? It's also a useful exercise for finance teams when they're trying to plan for maybe next quarter's or next year's margin go get. It's an easy way to sort of simulate what's possible, right? And then on the left side is customer details, right? So if you look at the sort of the architecture of this one page, and again, keep in mind this is one sort of dashboard among maybe 12 to 16 that you're developing for your company. The way people tend to look at information, this is the same way as you're reading some website, right? If you go on, read an article, especially true with dashboard, right? We tend to follow this F pattern, right? So it's like the letter F. We tend to look at the left side first, you move on to the right side, right? And then we actually migrate down. It's the same concept when you're trying to build these capabilities for companies. You want to make sure it's a bit intuitive and easy to use for folks. But this is where a salesperson or a sales rep, especially, they can actually view customer details. So whatever they select here, they can see product level, customer level. What is actually driving that bad margin performance? Is it increased discounts year over year? How has our sales responded to that? Is it too many product giveaways? Are we giving too many products just because we hope to win more business for that customer? And then quantifying the opportunity, but really making this pragmatic for the salesperson as they use it, with the ability to drill up and drill down. Rodrigo, you asked the question, what would be considered a good period of time to use on this view? Good question. Thank you. Typically, I like to use I like to use year to date, Rodrigo, for maybe kind of past the second quarter. I think it's a decent view. So if you're past like April, May, I think it's a good view. Year to date is always kind of the most pragmatic. If you're not, I like to use trailing 12 months. And so the ability to use trailing 12 months and compare it to a prior period is also really key, right? Good question. Anything shorter than year to date, it's less meaningful. Yeah, keep the questions coming, guys. If there's any even random questions, random commentary that pops up, just put it in the Q&A board. Similar concept with the discount versus net sales matrix, right? Except here, instead of margins, we're really shooting for understanding who are those customers that have really high discounts, right? And so ideally, you want to have a setup, right, with the customers that bring the biggest customer lifetime value for the company, or the biggest, even just the biggest annual purchase, right? Receive the most favorable discounts. In most companies, that's not the case, right? In most companies, it's just all over the board, right? It's kind of sort of a random, it's a random plotting of customers along the kind of the sales and the discount axis, much like what you see on the screen. And so here, the exercise is like, what is the impact if we actually reduce the discounts for some of these customers that you see up here? Small customers that have incredibly high discounts, too many free products, too many promotions, et cetera, et cetera. What is the impact on my business? And drill down to the sales folks to actually understand the individual drivers down to the product level, right? And so, very, very same concept. And, the exercise here, and again, as I think about building these capabilities, this is probably the most sort of time-consuming, most collaborative, and the most sort of brain-intensive portion of building margin analytics capabilities is really getting these 3 stages correct. So understanding the problem really effectively and how your stakeholders think in the organization and what helps them actually move the needle when it comes to customer and product level pricing and margin performance, building the concept and building that for literally each and every section of your platform that you're building, and then doing the design. And again, you can do this in Miro, PowerPoint, or you can do it on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. But I would say these are the things that matter the most, and they probably take anywhere between sort of 4 to 6 weeks initially. Building the minimum viable solution is the next step. By the way, it's a super easy thing to do. Once you have a concept and design phase nailed down, it's really, really easy to sort of build a solution that is probably 60-70% of the way there in terms of sort of functionality and maybe with a limited data set. But you build it over the course of maybe a couple of weeks, and you actually have your sales power users and your core team, right? Core team being the folks that have been intimately involved in creating these solutions with you, finance and pricing and merchandising. You have them test it out, right? The aspect that I failed to mention early on, and this is really foundational, right, is when you build these things in companies, just make sure you have a fairly decent data infrastructure present. So at the minimum, right, you want to have your transactional data there. At a minimum, you want to have your inventory data there. It's relevant for sort of clearance pricing type analytics to understand where quantity hands is and COGS, right, both FIFO and gross margin. Optionally, you want to pull in sales and profitability plans. It matters for sales reps to understand how their performance is, not just relative to some year-over-year number or some prior period, but also how they're performing relative to plan. And then if you have access to external data, right? So many manufacturers that rely on distributors, they have distributors sell out. If you don't, you may want to think about incentivizing your distributors via extra rebates to actually get that data. It's a popular practice nowadays. Most distributors who have APIs to their POS data, they can do easy ETLs, are willing to do that. Same thing with the retailer sell-through, right? So if you're a company that sells to consumers through retail stores, get the retailer sell-through data, and most often it's available through syndicated means, IRI, Nielsen, MPD. Sometimes you can have direct POS feeds, and then competitive pricing, right? So these are some extra elements that I would really advise you to actually include it as part of your sort of purpose-built data mart, right? So that's kind of the first step, is just making sure you have the right data. I wouldn't wait too long to kind of build up your data assets, or just making sure your data warehouse is like super sophisticated. I would say if you have transaction inventory data, you can start building these capabilities just so you can actually start moving the needle and accelerate margin performance for your company. The second step, which I think is really important, is modeling. So do some price elasticity modeling, right? It's a foundational thing for most companies. There's still a good percentage of manufacturing distribution companies that have very little idea what their price elasticities are. But it's needed. It's needed for scenario analysis around understanding what happens if you increase list price or if you decrease discounts and things like that. And so again, you can do that. There's some fairly popular algorithms that you can use to actually build it. I actually have a webinar next Friday. It's a technical webinar for data scientists and pricing analysts, but for those of you that are data nerds like me, you're more than welcome to attend. We'll actually do like a live demo in R on building price elasticity models. But do the modeling; it's important, and you can use some kind of drag and drop platforms as well, like Nime or Alteryx. Third piece is you aggregate and harmonize this data, right? So aggregate it at a level that's kind of relevant for you. Typically, I would recommend at least sort of a weekly product ship to location level, right? And all the associated details, sales rep and product segment and whatnot, right? But if you can do it daily, no need at this initial stage of maturity to build it at the transaction level. Nobody's going to be using, sort of diving into sales orders and things like that, right? Eventually you can get there, but I'd say at first, build it off of some more aggregated higher level that you can still take actions off of. Let me pause real quick. I think, William, you had a question. When you think about discount, are you just looking at just price discount product, your total sales investment, including rebates? Yeah, good question, William. I think it depends on data availability and data sort of cleanliness. Ideally, I would like to look at total discounts with the ability to delineate things like rebates, things like off invoice discounts, things like free shipping and stuff like that, AR terms, right? So that's kind of the ideal situation. My experience has been, depending on industry, some industries like CPG, some parts of distribution, depending on how sophisticated their sort of data platform is, they have the necessary details. Others don't, right? Like I've done this for fairly sort of margin-rich industries that are otherwise very sophisticated in terms of their human capital, but they have a really tough time breaking out these details in a very structured format, right? That exists in like PDFs and random Excel sheets, right? So I would say if you don't have the level of delineation, just use the kind of the typical gross sales minus net sales and just look at all discounts. I know it's a little bit harder to understand which piece is truly controllable by the sales rep versus something that's more contractual, but it'll do good enough job. Good question, thank you. So someone's asking, will these slides be available? Yeah, so I'll send it to you right after this call. You'll have access to this Miro board, and again, you can use it as you'd like. You guys will also get access to an actual margin analytics dashboard a week from now that you can likely just replace your own transactional data and just start using it, right? Avalon asks, what is the ideal team size, role, and structure to have with the timelines you mentioned? Yeah, I would say, Avalon, we're really focusing on building sort of this good enough solution that's going to get you, again, 80-90% of the value realization. To do that, you can honestly do this with one or two people, like one really good person or maybe two people. You likely need like a sort of a data engineer who's going to be able to build this previous slide. Right? If this doesn't exist, you'll need a data engineer to be able to do that, and that can be done as long as all the data assets are there in some internal system on-prem somewhere. It can be done fairly quickly by one really good data engineer, and then you'll need somebody to actually build the platform or the dashboard. And you'll need a Tableau expert, or you need a Power BI expert, or something else that you're using. That's what going with sort of these popular tech stacks that companies have, right? And so I would say two people. And again, the only watch out is you'll need somebody who's also a domain expert, right? So you can't just have some random database person who's really good at Tableau, really good at Power BI, but has little to no pricing and margin management expertise. Ideally, you need somebody who can do that and also kind of have conversations with the sales folks and do some of the things required for change management, right? Good question. It's a different conversation, Avalon, if you're trying to build a enterprise level app, right? You'll need a bigger team. You probably need 5 or 6 people, including a proper sort of digital product manager. You need somebody who's a full stack software engineer. You need somebody who's like maybe a more professional UI UX designer versus what you see on the screen here. But hopefully that helps. That's a different level of sort of sophistication. I'll maybe spend a couple of minutes on price elasticities. And again, for those of you that are sort of more analytically or statistically in tune, you can join me next Friday. We'll do kind of a live stats coding session. But when we do price elasticities, these are the typical variables that we tend to use that you see on the screen, right? The couple of call-outs that I'll maybe mention is, besides using price, and again, you can use the price of the product, you can use competitor price. Ideally, you want to create an index, a competitive price index, right? Because relative pricing matters for most industries. So you want to have that. You also want to control for seasonality. Most industries are seasonal. It's really important to actually control for that when you're building your price elasticity models that you're going to be using for your scenario analysis in this margin analytics dashboard. And then things like inventory levels. So if you have access to inventory levels for your customers, if you're a manufacturer and you have access to inventory levels of your distributors, you need to include that as well, right? Like a lot of the times, your customers have safety stock levels. If product dips significantly below that, they're just going to purchase regardless, whether you're 3% cheaper or more expensive than competition. So you need to be able to control for that, and obviously do some data engineering and some controlling for to make sure that you don't have too many variables, to make sure your model is not too complex. Again, simplicity is always the best choice when it comes to that. I won't belabor this slide either because it's a little bit too technical, I think, just for our purposes today. But the only thing that I'll mention is linear regression still sort of dominates most traditional industries when estimating price elasticities. I think it's perfectly fine for industries like maybe retail and CPG for the most part. CPG being consumer products, so snacks and beverages and things like that. They're fast moving, lots of transactions, fairly linear relationship between price and demand. But I would say for all other industries, if you guys work for distributors, if you guys work for manufacturing companies, if you guys work for any other company that does maybe sort of more expensive asset type manufacturing distribution, you actually need to use some more sophisticated methods and machine learning, right? So you can, and we'll go into that again on Friday, but there you tend to have a nonlinear relationship between price and units, and you also have a lot of sparsity in your data. So outside of your A movers, which is your top SKUs, it's going to be just incredibly kind of zigzaggy, and so you need a more sophisticated method. I think most companies, both companies and consulting firms that kind of do this type of work, they miss out on not leveraging some more sophisticated methods. I'm going to gloss over this real quick, but I'll spend some time maybe on training, and I'll try to go fast, so just to leave time towards the end to address some more questions. But as you look at the timeline, right? So we've kind of started here. Understanding the problem, it's about a week. And again, these are really intensive sessions where you're meeting with stakeholders. And if you have multiple divisions and regions, right, you kind of need to do that. But this will literally occupy your entire week. You spend about a couple of weeks on building the concept. And again, it's 2 weeks of super intensive work, designing. You build a minimum viable solution that gets you 60% of the way there. You've had some folks kind of try it. And then you're doing the training, right? So you're spending you're spending about three to 4 weeks to actually build a production version of the tool. But once you launch it, at sort of that 90-day mark, you do the training. And so the way I think about training is really sort of twofold. One is training the actual sales force and some of the functional experts in pricing and finance in 2 stages, doing the how-to, like this is the actual technical, how to use the platform, how to use the tool, what do the buttons mean, what do the concepts mean, and then the second piece is actually doing the so what, like doing a classroom style case study type method, and we'll go into that. But on the how to, things that have worked for me in the past is really kind of doing a couple of 1-hour sessions maybe with power users and sales leaders. It's almost like this train the trainer type concept, and then doing one session with the sales executives, right, to actually really train them on how to use this new capability that you built for them. Micro learning videos are important. If you have if you work for a big enough company that has a central L&D team, rely on them. Admittedly, sometimes it can slow you down, so you can just create micro learning videos yourself if you're really good at sort of simplifying the concepts, especially for the commercial organization. But doing 5-minute micro learning videos for each of these modules that I've shown you is really important. People tend to like that, along with a searchable knowledge base. On the so what, right? So I mentioned classroom training. It doesn't have, like, it could be a digital sort of a classroom environment, but this is where you really want to go deeper, right? So you want to have like a 90-minute session. You also want to have a longer session for the entire sales force, both on how to use it, what do the concepts mean, what is price mix, kind of volume drivers and things like that. So you want to spend an hour and a half with them, a couple sessions. It's important to actually involve finance and pricing and your sales power users in the conversation, right? It really kind of signals to the folks that this is important. It signals to them that there's colleagues of theirs that are actually sort of using this and have driven results and things like that. And then lastly, I would say, especially with a commercial organization, like gamifying things is really helpful. So creating quizzes, contests, and things like that. I would really encourage you guys to do, like, if you're building capabilities like this, do those things. It matter for the sales organization, particularly for sales reps. So these things can be done honestly in sort of 1 or 2 months, right? Doing the organizational training, train the trainer, micro-learning videos, et cetera, et cetera. Probably the bigger piece is actually driving ongoing action, right? So spend maybe a couple minutes here. I'll have a closeout for maybe 2-3 minutes, and I have address some of the additional questions that people submitted. But driving ongoing action and results, right? So that's a longer time frame. That's really kind of the remainder of the year, 40 weeks or so, maybe up to a year. But this is really sort of trying to proselytize this new capability that you built, right? So the first thing that you're going to do is you build this margin analytics platform. You need to make sure the pricing and these margin council meetings that you have, maybe once a month, typical kind of standard time frame. You actually have the revenue and gross profit growth deep dives, right? And you discuss the actions taken. You discuss what are the actions you're going to take next month. But you really want to leverage the platform and actually have those conversations. When you talk about revenue margin performance, you really need to talk about what is the impact of your pricing actions. What has been the impact of your input costs? How's your volume performing? How is customer and product mix impacting performance? And most companies that I've seen, they do these things that are sort of very high level by brand or by division or by product segment, which is really sort of erroneous, right? Because there's just so many things masked in those large numbers and averages, and so you really want to leverage this platform that you've built off of transactional data, right, or off of like small kind of detailed aggregated data, to actually have that very specific conversation around these 3 major customers have reduced our gross profit by $10 million due to negative product mix, and this is how we're going to fix it, right? And so that's kind of the shift in mindset of being able to have these conversations and having these insights at your fingertips. And ideally, you want to have sales incentives, right, that actually reflect kind of margin. Reward margin performance as well as top line generation, right? If it doesn't exist, you may want to spiff your sales team, but I would really encourage you guys, especially if you work in pricing, to push your sales organization to have those conversations with your CEO and COO, or have those conversations with the HR team to make sure that it's there. And then maybe the other thing that I'll mention here is it's really important that the capabilities you're building around discounting behavior analysis, customer analytics, margin or net sales deep dives, you want to incorporate those analyses into sort of the regular operating rhythm of the sales team. And so what that means, if you have a monthly sales team meeting, you need to make sure that the sales team is actually discussing some of these things. How's our price realization this month versus last month, or this quarter versus last quarter? How's our discounting performance been trending, year to date versus 6 months ago, and really be able to quantify these performance improvements. And maybe the last thing associated with that is, my experience is commercial folks, salespeople, sure, they like good insights and they like data, and especially if the data helps them sell more or make more commission. But I think having these shared stories in these meetings, so having a salesperson share maybe a good experience or a bad experience, underscored by the insights and the analysis from the margin analytics platform you're building, that combination of those two things, data and stories, that is always the most powerful. I go fast in this last section. So again, we launched it and we sort of trained the sales force and some of the finance and pricing power users. So now the question is, now what? Like, how do we actually ensure that this new capability becomes a regular staple in your organization and becomes embedded in the DNA in terms of how your company is thinking vis-a-vis margin management, price management, discount management. The first step is you actually want to collect some user feedback. And you want to do this fast. You want to do this as soon as you launch, very tactically, setting up some user group. It could be a Slack or Teams or whatever else communication channel that you're using. But you want to have your first enhancements about 6 to 9 days post-launch, right? So that's really important. Again, it signals that there's continuity. It signals that this is an important aspect of your company's mindset. Number two, you want to have some Q&A sessions, right? Again, you want to do this bi-weekly, ideally, maybe once a month, but you want to have your power users there by sort of region or division. And that's where you discuss usability things, right? Like what sort of improvements do we need? How do we enhance the data to have better insights? But then most importantly, this is where you want to share those pricing and margins wins as well, right? In addition to the monthly sales team reviews, right? Because you want to be able to have this dialogue with the sales organization of how these insights have helped them win more with customers, or how to help them maybe improve the profitability and in turn their own sales performance, right? So that's really key. Ongoing collaboration is important. So invite your functional and sales power users to sort of meet with you on an ongoing basis. And really important to make enhancements once a quarter. It doesn't have to be a new capability. It doesn't have to be a new dashboard. It could very well be sort of simplifying things, especially for the commercial organization. But it's really important that you have momentum. Once a quarter, you make some enhancements to your margin analytics platform. And again, signal to the organization that you're taking this really seriously. And then driving usage, right? And so how do you do that? You want to track usage, not in a big brother sort of way, right? But you want to track it, you want to make it somewhat public. And most importantly, you want to correlate usage with actual results, right? So you want to look at how price realization, how product mix, customer mix management, how net sales, how are those trending for sort of heavy users versus light users? And somewhat disingenuously, I would say, like, even if there's no causation, right? At this point, it doesn't matter, right? You built some new capability that is new to the organization. There's likely some skeptics, right? You want to be able to share these positive stories. So if there happens to be some spurious correlation between business results and usage, so be it, right? You want to be able to kind of proselytize it. You also want to be able to market the sales reps throughout the organization, right? So have these sort of pricing or margin analytics champions identified and make sure you kind of popularize them in the organization as well. Last thing that I'll leave you with is so you built this, right? You now have a margin analytics and optimization platform that's sort of foundational, right? Discount analysis, revenue and profit growth drivers, price and margin trends. Do this for about a year, get some successes, increase your profitability. But really the next step, I would say, in this sort of revenue analytics journey is actually building some tools for your sales organization that they can take to the customer, right? And it could be a sort of a value-added sort of sales tool for the sales organization that they can take to their sales appointments and sales calls, or it could be some embedded analytics, right? That you actually give to the customer, either in form of a SaaS or maybe some action analytics that you build as part of your core product. That's where Avalon's question came in earlier on ideal team size, right? That once you move into the realm of embedded analytics and action analytics, that's where you need a bigger team and kind of a more professional software management team. But even sort of way before that, right? You can do this in a way that's sort of this similar concept around outcome-based analytics. Short term, build it in 2 or 3 months, drive good enough value with your customers. And typically the intent here is help your customers address like the typical pain points that they have, that they really care about, right? Things like optimizing their inventory and their assortment, things like, helping them max out their profitability, providing marketing intelligence, or even like very basic things, like you're trying to do price increases and you have some strategic customers, maybe 10 customers that drive 50% of your business, and you're helping them do forward buys, right? So you're sending out some Excel sheets. That in itself is also a customer-facing analytics solution that, by the way, has generates a lot of goodwill and a lot of customer loyalty, and I think it pays off in the end. All right, guys, I'll close this out real quick. So I'll mention, for those of you, right, that are in pricing, margin, or maybe in data science, or if you have team members that kind of work in these areas, We'll do a very technical webinar. We'll do that in R. We'll actually build price elasticity models. We'll talk about the business implications and things like that. They also, the folks that attend, they also get access to the actual work, so you can kind of replicate it with your own data. And then I'll send out this dashboard. I'll do it either today or I'll likely do it on Monday. But you'll have access to this Miro board. So all the content that you've seen here, you'll have access to it. Just sign up for Miro. It's free. You can download it. And again, feel free to use it however you'd like. Ask me questions if you have questions later on. And then we'll have another webinar. I'll send out communication. I'll post it on LinkedIn. We'll have one on January 20th. So the dashboard that I'll send out for all the attendees, which is the actual margin analytics platform in Tableau, we'll actually go through that. Like, we'll go through how to use it. What does it mean? We'll do a case study. What are the implications from sort of a pricing and sales strategy standpoint? And so, yeah, hopefully you'll join me. Hopefully we can do that together, and hopefully you can just use it right off the bat for your organizations. But one last question, maybe we have 1 minute. Shyam was asking, can you please elaborate on how to apply lagged sales data for elasticity calculations? Will it be lagged price and lagged sales as an independent variable? Yeah, so I'll also send you, I'm happy to send you more detailed email on that, but that's exactly right. So what you want to do is use some lagged variables as part of your predictors, Ganashyam, like right here. So things like, what was the sales 3 months ago? What was the sales a month ago? What was it, the same week last year? You want to be able to test out which predictors are relevant. You also want to make sure there's not a lot of collision area between the two, but you typically tend to want to include that in price elasticity calculations as well. Why? Because price elasticity is nothing more than just sort of derived metrics off of demand models, right? In most demand models, you want to be able to include lagged variables to create some decent accuracy. So, guys, really appreciate the questions, and thanks for engagement. Thanks for spending Friday lunch / evening time for the Europeans. Ton of good questions. I know we went fast, but hopefully the fact that you'll have the kind of the materials and the content and things like that, you'll be able to digest it. And again, feel free to join me. About a month and a half from now, we'll actually go through the dashboard that you'll have access to. So thank you for your time, and reach out if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and enjoy your weekend. Thanks, guys.